I haven't listened to it, but apparently there is an interview with Dr. Alan Gaby, an esteemed friend and colleague, where he says sometimes people are taking too much vitamin D. Well, that may be true, but not if you follow our advice. Because if you keep your vitamin D in the 50 to 80 range and you have the K2, D3, and the other essential nutrients, now you really have the elective protective mechanisms so that your mucosal secretory IgA and mucins and defensins and opsonins will protect you. And then your innate immune system will take in anything foreign and recycle it and protect you. Now, the better news is that our approach, nature, nurture, and wholeness, physiology before pharmacology, get the essentials in, get the bad stuff out, or reduce the exposure to the bad stuff, is getting more, shall I say, interest and traction, because when the pandemic became news, most of the focus was on the infectious agent and the body's, quote, immune response to the infectious agent, or worse. And very little conversation about the fact that the catastrophes surely look like an absence of vitamin C and magnesium. That is acute scurvy and acute metabolic acidosis. That has been more or less reported, confirmed. People are doing venous blood gases and showing metabolic acidosis. Some of them are measuring serum magnesium and showing people in the lower half or even below the lower range of magnesium. So there is a profound hypomagnesemia that many of the people with comorbidities have, and it is the people with comorbidities that are at risk of the catastrophes. So if you have or know or take care of anyone with the comorbidities, now would be a really good time to do what we have been recommending for some time, which is the 4 self-assessments, the 8 predictive biomarkers, and the lifestyle program to maintain, to rebuild, to restore, to rehabilitate your innate capacities to fend off exposures that are going to happen. Now, the cautionary news is that it appears many people have a rather blunted, that is diminished B cell antibody response. The IgM comes up a little bit later and doesn't get as high. It comes down fairly quickly, actually, in many people. But IgG, which should come up, comes up a little bit, but not as much as you would really like, and more importantly, seems to be tapering off within months. What needs to be emphasized, and what some people are emphasizing, is that the T cell response is the most important one in regard to protective immune response to respiratory viruses, RNA viruses, COVID-19 viruses. And stay tuned, because as you know, lymphocyte response assays, including functional T cell assays, are in our wheelhouse. And we are looking at how to extend and improve upon the technologies that we've been applying clinically since the early 80s. So that's the headlines. Anything that anybody would like me to build upon, clarify, or amplify?
I have a question. In the cases with recovered COVID-19, they created immunity. There's any studies that indicate that these individuals, this community, can become carriers?
Well, it's a good question. Can you be a carrier? And what would it mean to be a carrier? And of course, the classic case that's taught in most medical schools is Typhoid Mary. She was a young lady, she carried typhoid fever, and where she went, people got typhoid fever, but she herself didn't get sick.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to say several things, and at the end, I want the takeaway to be, don't worry, follow this program. But how do we get to that point? Well, we do know that there are people, especially younger people, who have their own comorbidities, but younger people, who for days, not for years, not for months, but for days, before even the PCR test, the genomic amplification test, even before that becomes positive for a couple of days, if they sneeze on you or cough on you. Notice I said, if they sneeze on you or cough on you. Now, I happen to agree with Tony Fauci on a number of things, not the least of which is don't sneeze and cough on other people and don't let them sneeze and cough on you. To build upon that, there are a number of kind of interesting anecdotes that indirectly relate to your question, including the fact that many people are reporting a reduction in taste and smell, which is a zinc deficiency until proven otherwise. And zinc deficiency is one way of impairing, afflicting your immune defense and repair system. The essence of what I'm saying is that the people who are at risk of symptomatic COVID or catastrophic COVID or post-COVID syndrome, which is another part, I think, of your question, to the best of my knowledge of the moment, and this is something that is evolving almost on a daily basis globally, even though the virus can be recovered from surfaces after extended periods of time, the people who touch those surfaces do not get sick, and the people who touch those surfaces do not infect others. Now, the issue of young people without comorbidities, but in childcare or in school or in university or in playgrounds or in wherever you congregate. And then could those children, well, they're not going to get sick because they have a healthy immune system, but could they pick up from someone else who coughed or sneezed or something, and then bring that home, and grandma or grandpa who have comorbidities is at risk? My bottom line is follow what we have recommended in this little, reduce risk, boost immune defense and repair abilities, and stay resilient. And we're going to then update that, not changing much at all in regard to what we recommend, just being stronger and clearer about the evidence that it really makes a difference. It bends the curve. It prevents the catastrophes when you, in a comprehensive way, follow this nature, nurture, and wholeness physiology before pharmacology. Let's get the good stuff in and reduce the bad stuff exposure. Now, when I say reduce the bad stuff exposure, when you look at the places that have been most affected, they almost all are places with significant air pollution, 2.5 micron particles in abundance. So it's like smoking just to breathe the air in Wuhan province or in certain parts of Italy, etc. And in that area, in Wuhan, and I think this is true in the industrial part of Italy as well, people tend to smoke tobacco or vape. Both not recommended at all, both bad for your lungs. So impaired lungs, impaired hearts, impaired endothelial blood vessel function lead to the catastrophes, and those are signs of classic acute absence of vitamin C scurvy plus metabolic acidosis magnesium deficit. Now, yes, if you start with a catastrophe, I would be giving intravenous vitamin C 25 grams twice a day. I would measure peak and trough vitamin C if I could. And again, this is just news because it's not something that you can get today, but University of California, San Diego bioengineering group just reported that they have a sensor that can be attached to your skin and measure in your sweat the vitamin C levels. Getting peak and trough vitamin C levels, which means plasma, and properly processing and transporting and analyzing is a pain. Clinically, it's a pain. In research places, it's needed, and I can tell you what the peak and trough levels should be, but that doesn't mean it's easy to get plasma peak and trough levels in the community. But you can do a C cleanse. You can at least correct the scurvy, the absence of the scurvy. You can correct the magnesium deficit with the magnesium choline citrate combinations. Based on that morning urine pH or venous pH, which confirms metabolic acidosis in near 100% of the people with significant, what I would call catastrophic effects. So yes, we have to be concerned about carriers in society in general, but host hospitality is the real issue. Am I going to get exposed? Yes, given where I go and teach and talk and so forth and so on, I'm going to get exposed. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to get sick. It means that I'm going to keep my immune defense and repair system strong, and I am going to reduce my exposures to the extent that I can. And yes, I think good hygiene is a really good idea. I think that's something Semmelweis pointed out in the 19th century. You know, we should have good hygiene. And I don't think we should cough and sneeze on each other. Now, does that mean we're going to hug less? Maybe. Does that mean we're going to shake hands less? Maybe. I think it's Tony Fauci who said at some point that he thinks it's the end of hugging and social hugging and shaking hands. I haven't said anything about masks, but I guess I should, and it means N95 or better if you're going to use them. And they do have benefit, especially if you didn't know you were sick, but tomorrow or the next day you're going to get the flu or you're going to get sick and you're going to recover. And this is an important point. It's now, I think, increasingly clear that it is at least 10 people who get exposed and have no symptoms for every symptomatic person, and possibly as many as 30 or 50 if you follow the evidence from UCSF and Stanford and a few other places that are doing really careful contact tracing and follow-up and so forth. So we have, if I remember correctly, it's something like 130,000+ people have died related to COVID-19. Something like 3.5 million people have had symptoms. Well, if 20 people were exposed and didn't have symptoms for every symptomatic person, then there have been 60 million people exposed. If you look at what I would call the smart systems, these are computer systems that take the daily raw data from here, there, and everywhere and somehow project, estimate, guesstimate the future. They are more or less confirming what Tony Fauci has said and has said clearly and loudly, which is we should have locked down better and a little longer, and we shouldn't have been so enthusiastic about magically making it go away by wishful thinking or by, bleach. And so we're still in the midst of the first wave. And we really don't know enough about who might be a carrier. Therefore, keep your defenses up. We really don't know enough about transmission, although while there are some very impressive laser light scatterings of how far the plume of tiny droplets goes when someone sneezes. Okay, don't let people sneeze and cough on you, and don't do it to other people, and learn how to cough. It's, in your elbow is how you cough if you have to cough. Step back from people if you think they might sneeze or cough, or you. And yes, when I go out, at least to be a good citizen, I wear a mask, and now I wear an N95 mask because we were able to get them. So for a while, they were just globally back ordered, but now I think you can get them. The point is that N95 does filter to small enough levels that tiny droplets are excluded. Whereas most of the masks they're handing out en masse are cosmetic. And if you haven't seen the visual, if you just take a magnified picture of the mask, you see the weave of the fibers, and the spaces between the weave of the fibers is very, very large compared to the size of a coronavirus. It turns out coronavirus RNA viruses can be quite small. If I remember, the coronavirus is like 1/100th of the width of your hair. It's really small. So you need a mask that really gets really small things. And that's the definition of N95. Then there's various versions of N95. There are disposable N95s, there are reusable N95s, there are self-sterilizing N95s, there are N95s that people have prayed over. Anyway. We are late to learn the obvious lessons from hygiene to social distancing to being careful with the people at risk. So I don't want to put you at risk, I don't want you to put me at risk, and I don't want to put others at risk. That's why we have our recommendations. So I've tried to answer as best I can your question, because I think it's absolutely the right question or questions. And only in hindsight, only a few years from now, will people be able to go back and comb the raw data and say, how come it wasn't prevalent here and it was prevalent there, and how come it recrudesced here and it didn't go there, and we were measuring but not the right stuff, and now we're measuring the better stuff, and how does that compare now to then? It's a mess. The clinical assessment, okay, but the clinical assessment is usually followed by either a PCR test or an IgM-IgG antibody test. And that is apparently not sufficient either to say we got protection, because your antibody could be complement fixing and harmful. And the antibodies may turn out to be rather unimportant. The T cell response and the T cell memory may turn out to be critical.
Thank you.
Sure.
So Doc, a couple of questions follow up with that. So when you're talking about the innate first, the initial response, so if you do have a robust immune system and you are healthy, doing what we've always talked about, then you probably would not call on the B cells to produce antibodies, correct?
No, that's the point. That's the point. And that's
So-
why these are the people who, when you very carefully do the so-called community epidemiology, they've been exposed.
Right.
And from their mucosal secretory IgA mucins to their innate immune response, they didn't need the adaptive immune system to be called upon.
Right. So the antibodies aren't going to be
No,
responsive.
you're not going to make antibodies unless the adaptive immune system is called upon, which only happens when the innate immune system is overworked and underfunctioning.
And so my limited knowledge of PCR testing, I know how it was developed mostly for bacteria, and then this reverse transcript PCR testing for viruses. Is it, with the number of testing, some people say it's 70% accurate. I don't know where the accuracy is. And is it possible that it could be detecting, one epidemiologist said, if we did this same PCR testing we're doing now 2 years ago, we may have come up with positive tests 2 years ago for other coronaviruses. Is that a valid?
Well, no. There are certain things that are very clear. Coronaviruses have been around and known for decades.
Right.
Coronavirus 1 through 18 was quite benign. It caused mild flu-like symptoms, respiratory based. COVID-19 is a more COVID-19 helps who has hospitality to infection because their elective protective mechanisms aren't there, they're in survival mode, their innate immune system isn't getting enough ascorbate and magnesium, among other things, maybe some zinc. So they called upon their adaptive immune system, but it also was impaired by the excess of anti-nutrient oxidative burden and the lack of essential nutrients. So you get a blunted response.
Mhm.
Now, with regard to PCR, and if you're interested in the history of PCR, the man who won the Nobel Prize for discovering it was Kary Mullis. That's Karyymullis. He
In the
wrote a
90s.
biography, if I remember. What?
In the 90s, right?
Well, he got the prize in the 90s. No, it was even earlier than that when the, quote, epiphany happened.
Okay.
But he tells it very candidly in his Nobel address. And yes, it violated what we thought before, but nature didn't care. Physiology was physiology. And I'm old enough to know when reverse transcriptase was impossible. And then David Baltimore documented it, got the Nobel Prize for it. Went on, I think, to run the Rockefeller University. Very interesting guy. So in regard to accuracy, if you do the PCR test in a way that very few people will allow you to do twice, that is, you jam the flexible swab far into the back of the nose. If you do that, you can achieve 90+% sensitivity. That is, if they have the problem, you'll see it 90% of the time. We'll talk in a minute about how good does a test have to be widely used in the population, and it'll be very clear in a minute what I'm going to say. Okay. So PCR exists. They are trying to simplify the specimen collection. For example, cough. Now your sensitivity is in the 70% range, plus or minus a pretty big wiggle. And if you go back to the mid-1970s, Galen and Gambino's classic book, Beyond Normality, that defines sensitivity, specificity, and predictive index for lab tests. If you have a test and you're trying to screen a large population, many of whom do not have the problem, your sensitivity needs to be better than 0.95, and your specificity needs to be better than 0.98 or 0.99. Because if you screen 1 million people, even if 10% of them have the problem, 90% of them don't. So a false positive rate of any meaning is an almost fatal flaw for these very high amplification tests. And kind of to jump ahead for a moment, I predict that these PCR tests are going to come and go and not come back. And we will have other kinds of assessments, tools, tests that have better sensitivity and specificity. And as I'm sure you know, the first antibody kits that went out, including the ones that went out from the CDC itself, just ignore all that data. We goofed. Please don't shout at us. We're really nice people. We're trying to help you. It's just you can't believe anything before a certain point in time. And that point in time in regard to these IgM, IgG tests is pretty much May of this year. Before that, a significant fraction of the kits would not be approved today. They got these emergency use authorizations, and then the agency looked at the data and said, oh my gosh, we made a mistake, which, by the way, the agency never makes a mistake. The rest of the world has been corrected, but the agency, of course, never makes a mistake. Now, there are several systems that are capable or appear to be capable of screening very large numbers of people. One by Abbott, for which there's currently a cloud, and one by Roche, for which at the moment there is no cloud. If I remember what I was reading, Roche is saying that they'll be able to screen 5 million people a month starting in July. And Abbott is saying they're able to screen like 2 million people a month in July and forward. So we are finally going to get to be able to test large numbers of people.
Okay.
A footnote, before you have a specimen taken, find out who's paying for it. Because sometimes the test itself was free, but going into the clinic or into the emergency room or into the place where they could take the specimen, you ended up with $1,000 bill. Sometimes.
Okay.
Don't ask.
Right.
But I think we should ask. I think that especially at times when there's an uncertainty of coverage, or the continuity of coverage, or the necessity for the testing. Oh, we pay for the test when 3 rabbis and 2 priests say it's needed, or something, to be a little facetious. So we are getting better testing. We do need better testing. I think the antibody tests for the moment are going to be in vogue, although people will have all the cautions they hear from me about them. And then we'll get better tests, probably antigen-based tests, probably nuclear antigen, not capsular antigen. And people are working on that, but it's not clinically yet available.
And my last question is, you guys at the lab, are you finding any sensitivities that are related to things people have been using over the last few months, like hand sanitizers or Lysol wipes? Because the last few LRA tests I have, there are some different things coming up, and a couple were common. And so, is there anything you could put out to say, hey, look for this, and it's probably in hand sanitizers or things like that?
Thanks for asking. In the beginning, we didn't have enough data. Now we do have enough data to know that most of the hand sanitizers should be avoided.
Okay.
They should be avoided because they have methanol in them, which is wood alcohol that you want to avoid. They have other chemicals in them that you want to avoid. Not all of them, but most of them. And it turns out vodka,
It's just
ethanol, in a spritzer, in a little thing that sprays, is a very good hand sanitizer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you use that a lot, it will tend to dry out your skin because it's an alcohol.
Yeah.
And so if you use a hand sanitizer, it should be ethanol, vodka equivalent. And afterwards, a drop of sesame oil or grapeseed oil, one of the emollient oils, so your skin doesn't dry out.
Okay. Yeah, but so if you guys collect any data saying, hey, we're seeing this,
right?
Maybe you guys could put it out so we know when we're looking at the test. I mean, I don't use hand sanitizer. I just use regular soap.
I appreciate your question. And there's, of course, a delay. So first people start using the hand sanitizer, then we start getting specimens from people using the hand sanitizer.
Yeah,
then
and all these wipes and things that people are using, they're things that are reacting to,
Oh, well, among other things, many places are having problems with the plumbing because these disposable wipes are being used in such superior numbers. And then they're just thrown down
the
toilet.
Yeah.
Do I use hand sanitizer? No, I don't. I wash my hands. Okay?
Yeah, I don't either.
Let's say I'm cooking, or let's say I'm talking with people and drinking. On a regular basis, I'm not too far from a sink. And I use soap, not detergent, and I wash my hands. And I think if I was doing a cooking show, they would see that I rinse or wash my hands in between everything. You know, if I move from cucumbers to fennel,
Yeah.
I'll rinse my hands off. If I use a knife, I rinse the knife and me. But I don't use hand sanitizer. I don't want to sterilize my environment.
Right.
I don't know, it's another story for another time, but sometime I'll tell you my experience with the packaged goods food industry and their efforts to keep sterile production lines for their products, their packaged goods, and how I tried, with the help of senior management, to get them to know what a mistake it was to try to be sterile and why they should be using prebiotics, probiotics, symbiotics, things that are alive.
Mm-hmm.
And why the cost of transition, why their cost of transition would have been so noticeable, it would have hit the bottom line so significantly, that there were legitimate reasons why they could not go back. And I'm talking about the food companies whose names you know, the ones that say we're a better than average food company. Look at our packaged goods. If it's in a package, it's been processed. If it's in a package and it's been processed, it's no longer food. It looks like food. It can probably addict you with its sugar, fat, and salt, and maybe the preservatives, and maybe the artificial sweeteners, and it goes on and on and on. And by the way, today's news, this is news today. Something like 80+% of the commercial hummus has glyphosate in it.
I saw that article today.
Just today.
Dr. Khan, I think, put it out. Yeah.
I think it was EWG that put it out.
Yes, yes, it was.
They're not, they don't extrapolate. You know, if they say it, you know, they have evidence for it. And when I thought about it, I can understand why that is true. So now, either you make your own hummus, which is very easy to do, it turns out.
Yeah.
Or you get the organic hummus. And by the way, the secret to hummus is whatever time your recipe says to blend it, usually in a food processor, let it go an extra 45 seconds.
Okay.
I read a dozen articles on, you know, the best hummus in the world. And this woman, she wrote a very thoughtful article, and she tried this and that and the other thing. She said, it all comes down to how long you blend it. So I think we can go back to whole and making things ourselves. Now that I'm growing pickles and soon tomatoes, we are making pickles.
Okay.
You know, my grandmother used to make dill pickles. We
Yep.
grow dill.
Yeah.
We have garlic. We have pickles. We have vinegar.
Mhm.
I use apple cider vinegar. Most places use acetic acid clear vinegar, but I think if you're going to use a vinegar, apple cider vinegar is a good choice. We don't need oils, not edible oils. We have seeds and nuts and get plenty of fat from avocados and other whole foods. And all of this is folded into our recommendations of how to survive, including in the time of pandemics and COVID. So respiratory virus has been around a long time. They've been benign until now. COVID-19 has now mutated at least several times. So there's COVID 20, 21, and 22. And there are different reports about whether this COVID-22 is more aggressive or not, or if maybe the testing was better so that they didn't miss people who were having benign exposures. Will, you know, bulletins to follow, as they say. More studies are needed.
Okay.
So a lot of different aspects of this. I'm happy to address any of them.
How is the supply of the potency powder coming? I know there's been shortages.
No, thanks for asking. No, we now have the potency powder in both sizes. We have the capsules in both sizes. I believe we have now caught up, and I'm very grateful to everybody for being patient while we had, you know, extra production done. But now we are ahead.
Okay.
By one batch on all of the critical products, including the zinc lozenges, and we're going to try and stay there. The magnesium choline citrate has been, you know, flying off the shelves, as it should. No, I am very grateful to folks who have almost universally stood with us because they know that what we have is what they want.
Mhm.
And it's not, easily found
Right.
out and about. And frankly, most of our professional competitors are backordered. They
Yeah.
can't get product anywhere.
Yeah.
It turns out, and we were very fortunate for a variety of reasons, but we were very fortunate that all of our suppliers were considered essential. That is, they remained open during COVID, whereas most dietary supplement companies were not essential and they were just shut down.
Shut down.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks,
So
Doc.
not for the faint of heart, but thanks for asking. And yes, put in the orders for the potency, either the capsules or the powder, and we're glad to ship them.
Okay.
George and his team are just working very hard. The people in the field have been, of course, communicating because we're transparent. You know, if something happens or there's a bump, we let you know. But we also want to earn your trust.
Thank you.
Sure. Usually there are a few more questions.
I have one. In relation to the magnesium,
Yeah.
how often, for how long should we provide it to maintain the immune system? 3 months, 50 days, like the vitamin D, 50 days, 60 days. What are your recommendations?
Yes, in regard to the magnesium choline citrate,
Yes.
we recommend on a daily basis that when people get up after rest, that they check the urine pH. They take a piece of pH paper and they either pee directly on it or they pee in a clean cup and they dip fresh in the fresh urine and they look at the color. If it's sandy color, you're too acid and you need more doses of magnesium choline citrate that day. If you're in the 6.5 to 7.5 range, it'll be green, and then you only need 2. That is, maintenance today is 440 milligrams of elemental magnesium. And you get that by taking 220 milligrams, which is 2 capsules, and a teaspoon of choline citrate morning and evening. And for every half pH unit, remember it's logarithmic, so small changes in pH are big changes in physiology. For every half pH unit below 6.5, you add 1 more dose of the magnesium choline citrate to correct for prior deficiencies in metabolic acidosis.
So that
And
will be,
you do that as long as they're alive.
okay. So that will be
Checking the morning urine pH
okay.
and taking at least 2 doses and more if the pH is below 6.5 is now essential, required,
Okay.
for a very important, simple reason. If you take the best magnesium, now the worst magnesium has about 3% bioavailability. The best magnesium has about 1/3 or 33% uptake when the calcium magnesium ion channel is functioning properly. But that ion channel is very sensitive to toxic metals. It's very sensitive to a lack of magnesium itself because it takes ATP, which needs magnesium to make that ion channel work.
Right.
So at best, 1/3 comes in and 2/3 of the oral magnesium stays in the intestines. It can easily build up, cause hypermotility. People run to the bathroom and run away from the person who recommended it. We pioneered and have globally patented enhanced uptake and chaperone delivery using the magnesium choline citrate combination. And that's what we do recommend that people use on a daily basis, at least 2 doses for maintenance, and as many as 3, 4, or 5. For many people, you'll be surprised how many people will have a morning urine pH or a pH after rest of 5 or 5.5. And they will maintain that for some period of time because they've got a big deficit. And you've got to correct the deficit inside the cell before you see the correction of the deficit in the excess acid coming out of the kidney.
Great. Thank you. Great.
Yeah. Now, with regard to the vitamin D, we know the goal range, 50 to 80. You start with the K2D3 because you need that combination as a base. And then you have drops under the tongue to get people in the 50 to 80 range. Now, in regard to vitamin D levels, they do change fairly quickly if you follow what I just said. So you could check vitamin D in as short as a month.
Okay.
Many people say, wait a couple of months. Okay.
Mhm.
But the good news is that when you change the intake of the bioavailable forms, you can document and measure.
Mhm.
Now, I would ask people about taste and smell. I would urge people to take either our double zinc or our zinc lozenges on a regular basis. If you ever take more zinc than you need, you get a very specific kind of queasiness in your tummy, in your small intestine. I don't like to describe it because it sensitizes and primes people, to worry about it. But you say to them, look, it's different than anything you've ever experienced. If you have any unusual feelings, anything in your tummy that's unusual, let me know.
Mhm. Mhm.
This is self-limited. Remember, this is a water-soluble mineral. As long as you have kidneys. If you have kidneys, the sweat, the stool is going to regulate zinc. So most people are marginal in zinc. Some people are really deficient. The people that have catastrophe from COVID-19, many of them report that their sense of taste and smell was significantly diminished shortly before the problem happened. And that's a sign of zinc deficiency. Harry Henkin made a whole career out of zinc deficiency.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Is there enough zinc in the lifeguard, Doc, to just maintain a decent level if your diet is, on point?
Exactly what you just said. Let's say you're doing a lifestyle program. Hopefully you've done our 4 self-assessments and the biomarkers and you're following the lifestyle program. Now you have a diet that relative to Americans is rich in bioavailable zinc. And by bioavailable, I mean soluble. Most of the zinc supplements that are sold are ground up rocks. Unless you're going to put them in hydrochloric acid or something, they're not going to dissolve.
Right.
So we need better disclosure about bioavailability and functional measures. You might know how much is in the tablet or capsule or soft gel or whatever, but you don't know how much of that gets into the person.
Mhm.
And in answer to your question, yes, the Perk Lifeguard with 40 active constituents in meaningful amounts is designed to maintain healthy people. One of the markers is their urine will be sunshine yellow.
Mhm.
And you will find that it might be 2 with breakfast and 2 with dinner.
Mhm.
It might even be 1 with breakfast and dinner, depends on how efficient they are in the recycling process. But that well-hydrated person whose urine is sunshine yellow is a good marker that they have enough of the B complex.
Right.
And they got a full mineral, 10 minerals are in the Lifeguard, including zinc in meaningful amounts. And you can get people who will say they prefer the zinc picolinate and the other ones prefer the zinc citrate, or they prefer. Now, I looked at all that literature. If you worked for the company that sold the picolinate, you were a big advocate of that. And if you worked for the company that sold the citrate, you were a big advocate for that. They're both soluble. They both have literature. They both have studies, mostly exercise studies, to show their bioavailability. And it's the same thing as with chromium. You get chromium picolinate advocates, you get chromium citrate advocates. What I recommend is bioavailable nutrients in enhanced uptake forms, and that's what we pioneered in the late 80s when we started PERC, and have continued to extend, over the last 3+ decades.
Mhm. Yeah, I know if I take, I usually take two to 4 lifeguards, probably, average. And then there's times when, if I'm feeling run down, I'll use a zinc lozenge. And a lot of times I will have a little bit of stomach upset. So I'm thinking, maybe.
Oh, maybe you have enough zinc.
Yeah. So.
Now, how long after, let's say you did a lozenge, how long after that would your stomach start talking to you?
Within the hour.
No, that's something else. See, what I'm talking
Takes a
about
while.
requires, well, it requires that whatever is in your stomach empty into the duodenum.
Oh, okay.
Because it's in the duodenum where there are all these sensors for acid, and the bicarbonate comes in, and the pancreatic digestive enzymes come in, and the bile comes in, and there's all sorts of sensors there, including for zinc, including for magnesium, including for ascorbate. If it happens within a half an hour or within an hour, then chances are you would benefit from some L-histidine to top up your stomach acid.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And the lifeguard, I've had a few young women, high school, maybe college, and it's been women, never a man. You know, we know that the urine turns yellowish, but a couple of them have complained about odor from the urine after, you know, when they've been on the lifeguard for a little while. And of course, you know, young women in high school and stuff get, you know, very concerned with that. So
Understood. However, if they will persevere, that odor will go away.
Okay.
Because the lifeguard, in essence, is doing cellular house cleaning. And I often use the word schmutz. Most people understand that word means bad stuff. So I don't go into, you know, molecular details. But what is coming out, those odorific molecules, include some of the solvent residues, include some of the hormone disruptors, include some of the mold products, include some of the metabolic products that you really do want to get out of the body. We tend to be a society that doesn't like any smells. And I'll extend this to a personal point. I often take more than one shower a day, but I don't powder myself, spray myself with anything under my arms or as an antiperspirant. And yes, if I go out and really work in the garden and it's hot and sweaty,
yeah,
under my arms, I might be able to smell something.
Right.
I think there's a good reason for good hygiene using a good goat milk soap or a Castile soap, a good shampoo, and keeping yourself clean. I actually learned this from Bob Leichman. This was in the 1970s, and I said, Bob, do you use a deodorant? He says, oh, no. They have aluminum, they have this, they have that. No, he says, I take an extra shower.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. So thank you all.
Okay.
We'll do this in a month. And tell your friends to come with questions or comments or concerns.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doc.
Thank you all. This is fun.
Take care.